Lisa. Woo. Okay, so welcome. This is the continuation of our Genshin Impact stream where we're looking at animations, and this time we are looking at animations for our Catalyst users. And currently, this one we're looking at is for Lisa. She is a character that she's very cool in the story, but she's free, and I was totally not interested in her at all when we were playing the game. So that's why she is like level 12, and I don't know. But one thing to note is she does have very, very, very mature, very, very involved animations for all of her abilities. Probably one of the more very like elaborate ones. But at the same time, one of the reasons why I didn't like using her as a mage user was mainly because it was too much for me. She felt really slow and kind of like not responsive, even though she exudes all this really like nice energy in terms of like, is she a mom character? I was gonna say she's like a mom character or something, but man, we've I mean, my first reaction really is just there's a lot of hip action going on, right? Oh my god. Oh my god. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. All right. So I think this is interesting too here, because she does a lot of stuff with her feet and her hips. This is actually different from all the previous ones. She does a lot of hip and foot action, obviously without compromising a lot of the hand stuff. I will admit she is also very well endowed. That is distracting, but besides the jiggle on it, you know, we can look past all that, and we'll look at the curves, and not the curves, sorry, the arcs that her hands and her feet and her hips are making. All right, so I think this is pretty cool. Like from the get-go, she's doing this really interesting swipe motion with her hand. And what's also interesting, it's like casting from her hand. That's not something that we've seen earlier too. A lot of times the stuff is casting from the front, but in this situation, I think it's interesting too because this feels much more like she's channeling magic through the fingers, and that makes all this casting with the hands a lot more intentional, a lot more interesting. But there's an interesting thing here too, where her pose here has her elbows in, which is kind of similar to Sucrose, but her pose and her demeanor with the rest of her body, as well as the fact that this hand is out more and not closed in, it still communicates more comfortability and more just like, how do I explain, enjoying the moment. She's like enthralled, or just like, oh, okay, don't record that. Also, this is interesting too. Like, this is a very, like, usually when they're casting abilities, you usually see characters do wide stances, right? Or down stance or something. But for Lisa here, she's going straight into a pose that is very, very, very easy to be knocked off balance. Basically, feet together, knees together, root above. You have almost no stability in this situation. So, two ways of thinking about it. One, she doesn't know what she's doing, but that's hardly the case. The second thing is probably just more like she knows what she's doing. It's very easy for her, so she doesn't really need to think about it too much, right? People who are very, very well acquainted with their balance and their sense of balance and all these different things, they don't necessarily need to be like, I need to stabilize myself. And it's interesting too, because like what Lisa's doing here, her body here is very, very involved. And after she does the flick, it's very, very just like non-committal. It's like flick, and then zzz, electricity comes out and zaps people. That one's much more involved, so that's like the complete opposite. Woo! And that one's pretty cool. Ooh, that's interesting. So, in comparison to something like Barbara that we just saw, she's doing this cool thing where she does her cast hit right here, where it's open and it's out, and then but then you can see here that the hand continues to do this thing where it's like she's letting it go, and she's like continuing to send off the energy while like, I don't know, caressing it or something. It's like the hand just continues like, just imagine if there was like a ball here, like a physical ball. Her hand is like basically wrapping, once she casts it, it's basically wrapping around the outside of it. But this is called a moving hold, right? So in the case for Barbara, she hit the pose, and the whole moving hold is sort of just like a keep alive, right? She hits the pose and holds into it. And that's a very, very pop thing to do, or a pop star thing to do. It's like strike, pose, dance. This is a storytelling pose. I'm going to jive in it for a couple beats or something, right? But then in this situation for Lisa, she hits the pose, but she continues moving through it. And sometimes that's also very appealing in its own right? Hit the pose, as long as it still reads a little bit and you just move through it a tiny bit, you can get a little bit of it just like, kind of thing, right? I think Fischl does this a lot with her abilities. Like once she fires it, she continues a little bit of transition energy into like if she goes from pose A to pose B, she does a B prime, right? Just a little bit different, but still the same. Just so you get the feeling of like, I'm not done moving. It's still going. I'm not done yet. As opposed to like strike pose, right? This one is very interesting. Where she does this like backwards thing, and then she's like floating on a cloud, and I don't quite understand it, but it's cool. It's almost like she's riding on some sort of lounger. But I guess it's supposed to be like she goes backwards then forwards when she like casts this as a surprise. To me, it's like kind of like R. It's like, come here, zap, zap, and then boom, I'm right in front of you. Zap, zap. Cool. This is from the back view. I think it's pretty interesting to see sort of the lines that she makes here. Left to front, flicks with the hand out. Pretty interesting to hear that. I think for her cast, one thing that feels different about her is that instead of winding up and then hitting a hit frame pose when the thing comes out, she usually hits the pose a little bit faster than normal, like a flick, and it ends up casting, and then the effects come in. So she hits this like and then the cast fires off. So you can see here, for example, in most cases, she like and comes up, then it fires and goes forward, then it fires, instead of hand coming forward and then it fires as it goes forward, right? Boom, same thing there. Forward. Cool. And then this one basically is her E, but you can short charge it. Nothing remarkable there. This one's cool. And I think from a game implementation standpoint, this one's pretty interesting. Where when you hold it, she needs to have a channel energy. So there's a lot of animations being authored here where her hands are moving, her cloth is swaying in the energy that's sizzling around her. And she hits this one, which actually, I think she has a couple of things. She has a wind up right here, and then she comes down into this fully charged pose. So for example, right now, if you're holding your E, you have this ring that comes out. So you have an animation that tracks. You have an animation that tracks basically for that duration all the way up till here. Once the ring reaches its max size, which is at a predefined time frame, then she will enter the next phase of her animation, which is basically a loop for the duration of how long you can hold this fully charged portion. And then obviously the explosion afterwards. So if you were to think about it from a gameplay perspective, you would author it in this format. So you have basically wind up, and then you have channel. But you also have to make sure that you have this thing in the middle, in the beginning. Because if you just shortcast it, you can do a shortcast, right? So in this situation, you would have to author these separate animations. Let me do a green. Cool. But in this situation, this is how you would read it. You'd have to author basically like a 1. I can cast this as 1 prime, 2, 3, 4. And in this situation, this is how I would approach it for something like League, where for this E ability, you would have to author these 4 different things, at least for this situation. And then in this situation, if you really wanted to, you may have to sort of figure out transitions. Or something. Cool. Boom. That's neat. Right here, that's cool. It does a spin. All these characters do spins. Head first, chest, root, arms flow, follow. You can figure out what kind of shape you want from there. What's interesting here is she does this cool cross stance. That's pretty neat. Up, 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 up. Going back to yellow. Cross stance right here. A cross stance like that accentuates the hip, waist, and the leg ratio. If you ever read how girls take photos on Instagram, always cross your legs to look skinnier. But then at the same time, this makes your hips look wider, and that's like sort of what you look at intentionally. And especially here, when you do this thing where you're trying to cast forward, I have no idea what her hand's doing because I can't see the pose, but immediately what happens is her chest goes forward, her butt goes back, which I guess is appropriate for her. Cool. And this is cool too. Again, legs crossed on this up, straight into out for more power when you're doing contrasting poses. Thank you for the follow. Up, down. Cool. Oh, and that transition is pretty nice too. Do you see how there's like variation in that? So she steps, and then swipes. So instead of doing a lot of this like, oh, pose, and then just like blend through all of it and feel really like even, her step up here is cast, power, step, hold the up pose with the hand and swipe left. So you hold it a little bit longer, then quickly go left. You get a lot more variation there. Now that it feels a lot more texturized. Perfect. And that swipe sort of is like, I'm done. This is over. Blah, blah, blah. I was going to talk about like hip accentuation here too, but a lot of times you can see that when she's doing poses, a lot of times she presents herself with her chest open. And I mean just her upper body. I'm not talking, I mean, yes, she's female, blah, blah, blah. But in most of these cases, it's chest open, front open. Her hips are also facing forward and all that stuff. So it's something where she's very confident. And so whenever she changes from that pose, her hips are always kind of like in a silhouette that is very readable. Obviously, I would say that the cloth behind her, with the way it moves and stuff, obviously helps bring your attention to that. There are some characters that don't have that kind of secondary motion, but skirts and tassels around that area will always help bring attention to that spot. You can see that, for example, for her attacks, she's not doing a lot of like, we talked about this at the very beginning, but she's not doing a lot of this like hold the pose, right? That Barbara's doing. Hold and then like it just like waves in that area. She does a lot of this like, I've struck it and I'm relaxing. I've struck the pose and I'm relaxing, right? So that's where her keep alive and her like decay of energy is coming from, right? It's like, I struck it, I'm gonna extend a little bit. Struck it, I'm gonna extend a little bit. And you can see that like that's when you do the attacks a lot slower, and that's where you get a little bit of a personality. When you're fast firing these things, like pew 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 pew, you don't get that as much because it's just pose, and you're trying to go from one to the next. But if you hold on to these animations a little bit longer and she comes out of them, she does a very strong fast into it, and then a very slow sort of out, and then kind of returns back into idle. Very cool. I like the rhythm of this. She goes, her root goes what? Up, down, up. Nice. Up, down, up. All right. We have one last one, and that will be Ningguang. I hope I pronounced that correctly.